Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Oh, this smattering this morning. No, this evening. Hi, welcome. My name is Yaniv Segal. I'm the acting assistant conductor of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and I'm joined today by Abe Fetter, one of our newest members of the orchestra, assistant principal cello. So welcome, Abe.
Thank you.
So I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about this great program, and then we'll get to know Abe and chat about the cello and stuff like that. So we have 3 works on today's concert, opening with a Passacaglia by Anton Webern. Don't run away just yet. He might be known for being a Schoenberg disciple and student and proponent of the 12-tone period of we shall not talk about it music. But before he decided to go that way, he, like Schoenberg, stretched tonality and traditional tonality and harmony to its breaking point. And this piece, which he called his Opus 1, was kind of his first major orchestral piece or major work. I think his entire catalog can fit on about 2 CDs, so he wasn't so prolific in length, but every note of his always makes sense and has its place. And the Passacaglia is a very traditional form in classical music. It has a repeated figure upon which you create variations. And so that first figure takes the first 8 bars of the music with the entire string section in unison pizzicato. They are plucking the strings. And then there's an incredible set of variations that follow. You can kind of hear the boundaries of tonality, but it's extremely expressive and beautiful. It's a really amazing piece. If you don't know it, I think we're lucky to hear it tonight. Then we go back, I don't know, about 150 or so years to a double horn concerto, which it might say in the program by Haydn or attributed to Haydn. And probably the second of those is correct because we don't actually know who wrote it. And it was easier for publishers to sell a piece of music if it was by Haydn than if it were by somebody not named Haydn. So we're looking at an early classical work that features 2 soloists. It's traditional in the fast movement first, followed by a beautiful romance slow movement, and then the last movement is a traditional rondo in which a lively theme comes back several times with episodes in between to showcase the virtuosity and beauty of the 2 horns. Our 2 horn soloists are principal horn Karl Pittich and the second horn of the orchestra, Joanna Yarborough. And they're phenomenal. Obviously, if you know your orchestra, you've been hearing them all season playing from the back of the orchestra, and now tonight you get to hear them showcased out in front. They're really fine players. It's a beautiful concerto, and even though we don't know who it's by, I think it still has its merits. And there aren't that many concertos out there for horns or 2 horns. So it's nice to be able to showcase them. And then on the second half, of course, one of the big masterworks of the repertoire is Brahms's 4th Symphony, 4 of 4. Brahms is another composer like Webern, who was a perfectionist, who we know that he burned or got rid of his notebooks. Anything that he didn't consider perfect is gone. So the only thing left of Brahms's music are the things that kind of passed his test for good music. So you can imagine every note in Brahms also makes sense. And it also is connected to the first piece on the program because the last movement of this symphony is also in the form of a Passacaglia. Brahms actually is an architectural genius, So not only is it in a Passacaglia form, but it is also in a more traditional classical romantic form of sonata form overlaid on top of the Passacaglia. So you're going to hear some elements come back, some elements kind of be developed, and you might not realize that. It doesn't really matter because the music is great, but it's just a testament to his real genius that he could craft beautiful melodies, incredible harmony, and underlying everything is this tightly woven, interconnected architecture that I think is one of the big factors which makes his music so effective. Okay, so there you go, three very great composers or great music in the Austro-Germanic tradition from different time periods, all kind of classical while also, I think, forward-looking. It's a beautiful program. All right, and that was a whirlwind. But now let's go back to Abe. So, well, first of all, when did you join the orchestra?
I started in September.
All right, very, very recently. And before that, you were in Dallas?
Yes, I was in the section of the Dallas Symphony.
Okay, and are you from Texas?
No, I'm from Chicago originally.
Okay, so he didn't get scared by the weather. We appreciate that. And where did you study?
So I studied at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia for my undergraduate degree. And then I won a job right out of school in the Sarasota Orchestra as principal cellist there in Florida. And after 6 years, I went back to school to get my master's at Rice University at the Shepherd School of Music. And then I won my job from there right out of school at that time in Dallas.
Very cool. And how long were you in Dallas?
2 seasons.
2 seasons. And this is important because then I gathered you bought a house.
Yes.
Then won the job here.
Yes.
And your wife is also a musician.
She is. My wife is a beautiful harpist.
She's beautiful and a harpist, or a beautiful?
Both.
Okay.
All of the above. Thank you for saving me on
that. And I understand she also then recently won a job.
Yeah, so she won principal harp in the Buffalo Philharmonic just after I won the position here in Detroit.
So that's a commute, but closer than Dallas.
Yes, 4.5 hours through Canada.
Through Canada. And then, on top of all of this exciting news, there was some more recent exciting news.
Yes, on April 8th, we welcomed a baby boy to the family named Samuel.
Yeah. So lots of exciting changes, one after another.
Yes.
So harpists probably don't play every week in the orchestra, right?
Right.
So, an orchestra is made up of a core group of musicians, but not every piece requires harp. But generally, every piece seems to require cello.
Right. Yes.
So is there such a thing now, of course, with all these changes, where is any day the same like the next day, or is 1 week, is there any routine currently to your life?
The routine generally is a week-by-week basis. In both orchestras, the weekly schedule can change from week to week depending on the program. So here, with a classical week, we have a pretty standard rehearsals on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes concert Thursday night, sometimes rehearsal Friday morning, Friday night concert, or a Friday morning concert. It's usually pretty standard from all of the 20 weeks, and then for Pop's Week, there's also basically a standard schedule. So we can know, looking ahead, what each of our weeks looks like. But my wife's been on maternity leave until this week, and she went back to play the last week in Buffalo, which they're playing an unstaged version of Carmen. So
big harp part.
Yes.
All right, and between all of this, when do you have time to practice? Okay, never mind.
We've both made time. Fortunately, our son has been quite agreeable to the sounds of our instruments.
So far.
And so he will fall asleep or sort of just calm down when we're practicing. So if my wife is taking care of him for a little bit so that I could practice, or if I'm taking care of him so that she can practice, we're able to squeeze in some time. And then since she's been on leave and been at home, I've been able to come to work a little bit early and maybe stay a little bit after a rehearsal just to get some extra practicing in.
And where's her family from?
Her family's from Maine.
Okay, so it's difficult. Now, what is you auditioned for assistant principal cello?
Yes.
Is the process for that, or the repertoire for that audition, is it any different than winning a section job?
Generally, yes. I'm sure you've talked about auditions in some form here at the pre-concert lecture. Each orchestra requires a set group of pieces, whether it's concerto, a Bach suite, or maybe some excerpts from the standard repertoire. When title positions are up for auditions, usually they'll add orchestral solos. So for cello, you'll get the opening of the William Tell Overture, the slow movement from the Brahms Second Piano Concerto. You might get the Shostakovich First Symphony, or is it 15th Symphony, because there are some big solos there. Sometimes you see an excerpt from Tosca, where there's a nice cello ensemble solo. So when the title chair positions are up, there are generally some extra solos in there.
Okay, not Don Quixote.
We'll see that too.
That's a big
It's a huge
cello. Sometimes it's so huge that sometimes it goes to the principal cello, and sometimes maybe even a guest cellist.
Right.
Do you kind of have a area of the repertoire, either solo or orchestral, that you kind of gravitate towards, that resonates with you?
I'm sort of a Brahms, Beethoven, Bach kind of guy.
So it's a good week.
It's a great week. For solos, I really do enjoy playing, Schumann Concerto or the Dvorak Concerto. I mean, the Bach suites are some of the great masterworks for the cello. Generally, though, I really do enjoy each week with the music that we're playing. When people always ask, well, what's your favorite piece of music? And I say, well, what am I working on this week?
That's right. That's exactly right. Because you have to love it, right? Otherwise, what are we here for?
Right.
And if it's a good composer, if it's a good composer, there's always something in there to work on.
Right.
And there's always something to love.
And when you're playing with an orchestra like this, then it's enjoyable all the time. So.
Now, how tall are you?
6 foot.
6 foot something?
Yeah.
6'1",
maybe? When
no,
my hair's
that.
poofier.
I was thinking with you and Wei in the first stand, we're going to start
Yes.
a Detroit Symphony basketball squad.
We have a pretty tall cello section.
Yeah, but the fingers, it's a problem. I remember always wanting to play pickup ball in college and showing up to a piano lesson with a couple fingers taped up. All right, I'll practice the right hand this week,
Right.
My parents never wanted me to play sports. As a violinist, it was even worse. I don't know about your parents. Were you allowed to play ball?
I was. I played baseball and basketball and then gravitated more towards golf. But for basketball, I've injured my fingers a couple times, and when I injured my left hand, my teacher had me practice vibrato using a tennis ball. And that's how I learned the swan, was playing it with a tennis ball pressing the string.
I'm not familiar with this technique, but I'm going to write a piece for it. So
Right.
Explain this.
So you hold the tennis ball in the left hand, and you push it down on the string, and then you use that.
So you're holding the cello like normal.
Right.
And then on the fingerboard is a tennis ball.
Yes.
And you're
Practicing
sliding the tennis ball up
Right.
and down. And what does it sound like?
Pretty interesting.
I've heard of pieces with ping pong balls, so now tennis balls. Okay. And do you that whole new meaning to dropping the ball? So so you have to have constant contact, right?
Constant contact with the string. And you can practice different oscillations for the vibrato.
And can you actually move it up and down the fingerboard?
It's pretty easy. It slides nice.
Which fingers were jammed in this case?
The second and third.
Yeah, and you still could do that. Oh,
Right.
fascinating. Okay. That's great. Okay, tell me about some more extended techniques you can do on the cello.
Well, there's all the basics, Ponticello and Colegno and
So
snapping.
Ponticello, okay, we don't hear that. Oh, you will hear that tonight,
We'll have that tonight.
in
So
the first
Ponticello's
piece.
when you play really close to the bridge and create a scratching sound.
Right, so for example, the ratio of noise to pitch
Right.
can change based on how close or far away you are to the bridge. And when you get right onto the bridge, ponti, like bridge, playing on the ponticello, playing on it, you get a raspy sound with very little pitch.
Right.
And Webern does ask for that. It's not so obvious, I don't think, but
It's pretty soft, but I think it's exposed, so I think you'll be able to hear it.
And also, you can also move with the bow farther away from the bridge, and then you kind of get a thinner sound. There are fewer overtones.
Right.
And
Also
so,
called for soltasto.
called
when you
soltasto.
play
Yep.
over the fingerboard and create just a really hollow.
And then
beautiful sound.
Abe also mentioned something called colegno, which means literally with the wood or with the stick of the bow, and then they will hit the strings with the bow, and that's a lot of noise to pitch ratio because there's no horsehair to resonate. Oh, right. Now, at what point did you think to yourself, I would like to be a cellist?
Well, I was, probably still am, pretty stubborn and competitive. So my older brother played the cello, and my parents told me that I couldn't touch his cello. And in the Suzuki method, when you learn to put down your instrument, you put your cello down on this side, and you put the bow down on this side. So I picked up his bow and picked up my dad's 12-string guitar and played it like a cello when I was about 2.5. And so then my parents thought it would be a good idea to start me on the cello.
So you knew then.
Yes.
Does he still play cello?
He does not. He works for Google now.
He has the guitar.
Right.
And Curtis, if you don't know, is one of the most incredible institutions, very, very small institutions in this country for classical music education. How many students are there? Under about 100 or so?
120, maybe?
And it's...
My graduating class was 44 people.
That's like half the orchestra.
Right.
Yeah. Just enough students to fill out an orchestra, put on some operas and have some pianists.
A vocal program, there's now a guitar program.
It's in Philadelphia.
Right.
And to get in is obviously very competitive. So now, just going back to this whole upbringing, at what point do you say, all right, I have to practice 2 hours a day, then 3 hours a day, then my almost 5-year-old is playing violin in like 5 minutes of practice and we get gray hairs. So luckily my wife practices with him more than I do. Yeah, like when did you have to, was it a struggle to practice, or was this competitive spirit or love of the instrument so overpowering that you did put in that effort?
I am a proponent of efficient practicing. So I feel like if I got something done, or if I said, okay, I'm going to learn this page of music, then I would be done for the day. If it took me 45 minutes, if it took me 3 hours, that was sort of my goal. And as I got older, I then became even more efficient and could then have the patience to even keep going after I accomplished my...
See, I probably would be like, my goal is to tune my violin. All right, I'm done.
Well, if you rosin your bow for 15 minutes,
It'd be really good
tune for 15 minutes, you've got a half hour out of the way. And unpacking can take another 5 minutes. Packing up can take another 5 minutes.
I see how this strategy works.
It wasn't very hard to practice. I really enjoy the work. Of course, my parents thought I could practice more. And leading up to college auditions, my mom was a nervous wreck. And she would always tell me that I wasn't practicing enough, not practicing enough, and then I got into the places where I got in, and I said, I think I practiced enough.
Ooh. Are your parents musicians, aside from the 12-string guitar?
No, they're not musicians. I think they started my older brother on the cello in the early 80s when I guess there were some studies that had come out that music was great for kids and their development of their brain. And
Right, the Mozart effect, which is totally not scientific.
Sure.
There is a lot of scientific studies which have shown the benefits of music education and exposure to music and how it affects our reasoning and language skills and math, et cetera, et cetera. But the Mozart effect, not so much. So you've been in Detroit now since September.
Yes.
And I guess with buying a house and planning for the kid and stuff, I hope you've had time to start to see the city a little bit.
Sure. So initially we actually rented an apartment downtown in Midtown, and so we got to explore a lot of the city then. And then as our schedules got really busy and as sort of the pregnancy advanced and things were going well, we sort of started to tone it down a little bit and sort of prepare for the baby and moving again when we bought a house.
I think it's an exciting time to be in Detroit, and it seems like every week there's a new restaurant open. That's really amazing. So it's a good time to be back.
Well, when we actually were looking for apartments in May, we were floored with how many buildings had no vacancies. So it was really interesting to go downtown and see all these buildings being finished up or being built, and they say, "Oh, we don't have anything for you. Sorry."
Wow. In a few minutes, I'm going to open up the floor for some questions. If you have questions for Abe about some cello things or about, I don't know, orchestral playing. I'm still interested in some of this background stuff. So your parents put your brother on cello, but so you mentioned Suzuki, but generally most people kind of, when they're little, gravitate towards violin for Suzuki. So any reason why it was the cello? I mean, had it been a violin there, would you have been a violinist now?
It's possible.
Oh, you said that with a smirk.
I'm not so sure. My mom heard Frank Miller, who's the former principal cellist of the Chicago Symphony. She heard him play Kol Nidre at a Yom Kippur service when she first met my father, and she fell in love with the cello, and I think that's when she decided if any of us went into music, we'd play the cello.
And that, of course, means you need a bigger car, and anytime you went off to music camp or an audition, your cello had to get a seat next to you.
Yes. So when we fly with the cello, we have to buy a seat for it. When I first started buying seats for it, we would get half off the ticket price, but no more. Now we pay full price.
It gets a special seatbelt?
It does. Usually you can just get a seatbelt extension. I think when you fly through Canada, sometimes they put a net on it.
There was a little bit of some drama because a well-known cellist had been collecting frequent flyer miles for his cello.
On Delta.
On Delta for years. And, I mean, the cello flew as much as anybody else did and earned a lot of miles, but the policy is that it's for people. Some people might think their cellos are people, but Delta did not agree with said person, right, and was quite unhappy when they found. But this went on for like 20 years, so it was. I don't know. Does your cello? No, I shouldn't ask you that, right?
My cello does not get miles anywhere.
Oh, yeah. It is a ticket. A ticket's a ticket. You paid for a ticket, right? All right. Well, write to Delta. We can put our foot down. Maybe like sign a petition. But it's better than the double bass doesn't fit or the harp doesn't fit.
Right.
So they have to have these huge flight cases when they want to travel with their instruments, and there's always a fear that it'll get damaged. And
I think for harps, I don't think they allow harps to be checked anymore. They used to be put a harp in a travel case and you could check it, but now you have to find a special shipping company, and it can only be shipped when the weather's good, unless you want to pay for a climate-controlled shipping container. So it's sort of an interesting process. When my wife was taking auditions, she'd have to drive her own harp across the country.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and you need a harp mobile. That's even bigger than a cello mobile.
We have
so now you have a harp, a cello, and a baby.
And a 75-pound dog.
And a 75-pound dog.
Right.
Which one takes up the most room? Probably the dog. What type of dog?
He's a golden retriever.
That's a fat dog.
Yeah. His name is Ernie Banks.
Does anybody have any questions for Abe? Yes, right here. My instrument? Oh, yeah, where your instrument is a cello, made by whom?
Oh, my cello was made by a man named Lawrence Wilkie out of Connecticut. It was finished in 2014, and so it's almost 5 years old. And it's a beautiful cello. I've really enjoyed playing on it, and I thank him for a lot of my success in auditions the past couple of years.
How did you find it?
I played on about 100 different cellos to try and find one that I really liked, and that was the one.
Our cellos aren't in uniform sizes. Like violins tend to be basically in a full-size violin is generally a size. Of course, the ribs or wings could be a little bit bigger or smaller, but cellos can vary quite a bit, can't they?
Yes, the cello I played on before I had this Wilkie cello is by a maker named Giuseppe Oduardi from Italy, and it was a very narrow instrument. And the cello I play on now is modeled after Janos Starker's Grafiller, and the Grafillers tend to have a much wider body of the instrument, so it was an interesting change.
Does it change anything with your left hand, or just kind of sitting position?
Well, so with the narrowness of the instrument, and for how long my arms are, it was starting to cause me some discomfort with having to sort of be in this position more. And with a wider cello, then it kind of expands the chest out, and you can have an easier time. At least I have an easier time playing on that instrument physically.
So you tried 100 cellos, and how many bows?
0. I have a great bow.
Oh. Who was your bow by?
Emile Houchard.
Oh,
I think it's from 1947 when he was in New York.
So you actually were matching the cellos to the bows?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Both. Everyone thinks about the instrument, but it is a combination. And a great instrument, of course, can be great, but when matched with the right bow, it makes a big difference.
And in a lot of ways, the bows can be a much more personal experience to purchase, because it's really you think about the paintbrush, that's really what we make the sound with, and it has to feel comfortable and get the right sound out of the instrument. So,
if there's another question, I can take one more question. Otherwise, we have to get off the stage in just a few minutes to allow the orchestra to warm up for the big concert coming up. So the question is about efficient practicing. What exactly, could you, as another fellow musician, can you give us some tips about what exactly that means?
So the first thing is if you're working on a passage of music, is to decide how you want it to sound. Whether it's a fast passage or a slow passage, there's a certain phrasing that you might want, a certain quality of sound. And then for me, I then slow it down and try and recreate everything that I'd want to do much slower, so that it gets ingrained in my memory and in my muscles. If it's a fast passage, I'll break it down into different rhythms. So you'll have like a long-short rhythm pattern and a short-long to help with the coordination in the hands. I could go on for another hour about it, and this is just the beginning. But
I think what you're talking about is focused or directed practice, so that you're not repeating things without a reason.
Exactly, and we're talking about taking a small section of the music, maybe it's 1 or 2 bars of the music, and really just working on it until it's right. And then moving on to the next set of bars, and then putting those, multiple bars together. I always encourage my students to at least play a passage slowly, and then maybe build up the tempo. Some other people have suggested a slow, and then medium, and then maybe a little bit too fast, so that it's uncomfortable to play. But that's sort of as short of an answer as I can give without going on an even longer lecture about practicing.
Well, thank you so much, Abe, and thank you
for
all
having me.
for coming. We hope you enjoy the concert.